Good morning. Feel like we've traveled a lot of different places already today. Does anyone need just like a moment? So it's amazing that we're here. I feel really grateful to be here. Originally, maybe largely due to the plan I was supposed to present with my co-author, Zindel Siegel, who helped develop mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. He had a prior and then re-emerging memory commitment to be at a PhD defense, but I think he'll be here later today. So this is work that is deeply rated with his collaboration as a lifelong clinical psychologist and mindfulness practitioner. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and to share. Always in my own head wonder how possibly could bring value by just saying things. Left to my own, I would just stay on my own. So this is a bit of a boundary crossing for me whenever I get coaxed out of my nerd cave to come and present. So you're in for an introverted treat. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this idea called sense foraging. It's an attempt, not the first and not the last, to figure out a way to translate universal, timeless principles in a way that people today can digest and, dare I say, even want to dip a toe into. It comes from a growing dissatisfaction that myself and Zindel had with becoming academically successful or more and more successful, and realizing that it doesn't really make much of a difference. I mean, it makes a difference if you're trying to get a job and accolades and so forth, but the amount of lives that a top tier publication changes is, I think, disappointingly small. And so at what point does research start to connect in a way that someone who is not already part of a contemplative community, or dare I say part of a community, they don't feel like they're part of a community, how do they begin to become engaged in reflection and questioning, and maybe even opening up into their own lives? And so this is just another translational attempt. And so rather than just go through my constantly expanding slide deck, I did want to channel some reflections from yesterday into today's talk. So, sometimes doing things last minute is a feature, not a bug. So I just swapped some other things out. So one theme that came up a lot yesterday was, what are the minimum conditions for happiness? And what does it mean if those conditions are satisfied and we are still not happy? I think this is, you could say a fundamental question in a lot of Buddhist thought, but I'm not an expert there, so feel free to correct me. But also in this whole Western obsession with, pursuit of individual values leading to happiness, and never feeling like you're really getting there. And so there are many different definitions for happiness, and perhaps at its heart, we don't want to prescribe any single definition because we cannot possibly be right for every person. But one way to sort of look at the conditions for happiness is to be in a place where we're balanced between two primal forces or conditions in life. And one of those conditions is the idea that there is something that it's like to be us. There's something that it's like to know who we are, and to be comfortable with that, right? So there's this force of stability, right? Happiness is like our happiness, even if who we are is not permanent. It's not someone else's happiness. It's something about us, something that we want to be stable and enduring and feel like, yes, I exist in the world. We need to have that sense of stability. But to hold on to a really rigid sense of stability is to be constantly thwarted, because the true underlying condition is a condition of change. So happiness is about being able to be this living being in the world and feel like you exist and have the right to exist and, dare I say, enjoy existing, but to also realize that you cannot possibly be permanent. You must constantly be moving to have any sense of identity or stability over time. So happiness is actually a kind of balancing act. And if you don't believe it in a meaningful philosophical sense, it's at least the way our bodies operate, right? There's a sweet spot. If you get too hot or too cold, it's not good for your survival. If you go on an all water diet, I have a roommate, total digression, a roommate once in undergrad went on a diet where she was supposed to drink 7 liters of water a day. Her body was not happy. And if you get dehydrated, let's say you consume a diuretic substance that makes you feel odd constantly throughout the day and then don't supplement it with water. None of us do that. That's also not great for us. So our bodies are constantly trying to get us into this place of homeostasis. There's a balance. It's a balance because conditions are always changing and we're always trying to move back into that place where we can be us, physically us, temporary stability in a place of impermanence. So we have to be able to be responsive to change, even though kind of what we want is to be one thing. And we can't get anywhere. We can't be successful in being that thing, being that person we are, having the values we want to express in the world, unless we are able to change because we are constantly being changed by the world. Okay, so let's get more concrete. This idea has kind of been adopted a bit in some scientific and pop scientific literature. Let's talk about the example of like heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is the idea that it's good that your heart rate changes over time. It's not actually a sign of health that your heart rate stays exactly the same over time. If you stand up too quickly and your heart rate doesn't change at all, sometimes you sit back down even quicker. So our heart rate's supposed to change. Another fancy nerd word, does anyone know the fancy nerd word for 3 words for heart rate variability? Respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Respiratory, breath, sinus. I don't know, it's going through some sort of cavity. Like a hole. Arrhythmia. It's not in a set rhythm. So one of the number one ways that our heart rate is supposed to change is because our body is just trying to be efficient and finding balance. And yes, standing up or sitting down or running up a set of stairs or sitting in one place is a big change, is a big force of change on our bodies. But one of the biggest forces of change on our bodies is just the fact that sometimes we're flooding our bodies with oxygen and then slowly we're running out of oxygen. It happens every 12 seconds or so. No, I should say 5 seconds or so. 12 seconds of deep meditation. It's called breathing, right? So the primary drive of your heart rate variability should be that when you breathe in, your heart rate speeds up a little bit. So it's like, ooh, oxygen, let's use some. And then your heart's like, oh, I'm tired. I can't really take a break, but I could kind of like relax a little bit when I'm breathing out because no more oxygen. So a body that's in harmony and is balanced is just speeding up a little bit when you breathe in. Your heartbeat is speeding up a little bit when you breathe in, slowing down a little bit when you breathe out. And then, of course, yes, it should change a lot more if you have to do some cardio or run from a X-Man. Yeah, X-Men. But there should be this kind of natural movement. And so this idea of heart rate variability has been seen as a virtue, that your heart can change a lot from day to day, or not from day to day, from moment to moment, because it's a sign that your body is responding to changing conditions in each moment. So what happens en masse as we get older? Kids, like, our hearts are going all over the place. Like a duck, wow, I'm tired, juice. But as we get older, things kind of go down in terms of our variability. And some of this is necessary, right? We're not built to be here forever. But a lot of it is because we sort of withdraw from wanting to change. And a lot of what we see as signs of success is protecting ourselves from having to change, finding that fixed position, finding that fixed relationship, getting the body type that you want, not having to ever do anything that you don't like to do, not having to go outside, not having to eat foods that you don't like. Life would be perfect if everything stayed the way exactly that you wanted it. Let's stop things from changing. But change is the underlying condition. So what we're kind of doing is also making it harder for ourselves to find balance when things inevitably change. And so yesterday we heard kind of call out to this idea that when we have negative emotions, it would be great to let them go. And the true time course of negative emotions is around 90 seconds. Right? This comes from Jill Bolt-Taylor talking about just sort of like the basic neurotransmitter response of sending an emotion in your brain gets sort of metabolized, makes room for some other response in about a minute and a half if you let go of it. And that's a kind of, something's changing moment. What should I do about it? And in a healthy situation, you kind of get through the emotion. It's 90 seconds later and you're on to the next thing. You kind of come back to baseline. But there's other time courses and other things that happen in our bodies that prepare us for longer term stress. So let's say something happens, someone makes you eat a food you don't like. You open your lunchbox and you don't like peppers and they're in the sandwich. You think, I don't like this. This is unacceptable. Why am I at this conference? Let me think of all the other things I don't like about the way this conference is being run. I feel threatened. And your body says, you feel threatened? Holy crap, we better stop you from bleeding. We better pull the blood vessels away from the surface of the body. We better make sure the heartbeat gets really fixed into like a slightly high intensity, low way. Better get your thoughts ready to discern where the next threat could be coming from. It could be coming from anywhere. There could be a pepper behind you right now. There probably is. Yeah. So your body releases cortisol. Cortisol tells your body that it needs to be ready for action because it's not safe. Well, I mean, it also just tells you it's time to wake up. But in this context, gives you an extra shot. They'll give you a double shot of cortisol today. There's peppers in my sandwich. Cortisol takes 60 to 90 minutes to metabolize. Right? Half-life of 60 to 90 minutes, maybe 40 to 60 minutes before you start letting it wear off. During that time, you're attentionally predisposed to find more things you don't like. So now there's a bit of stickiness to moving back into homeostasis to keep you alive, right? Because peppers, right? But we've evolved to deal with more serious threats. Now we have a litany of symbolic threats. Our ability to move back and forth has been limited because we've gotten used to a very narrow range of things that we have to deal with. We're victims, perhaps, of our own success, where symbolic threats are treated like X-Men. X-Men I just made up this time, but I'm going to run out of it during this time. So what happens if you find another threat during that 60 minutes? More cortisol? Then you find another threat. Oh, we're singing now? I didn't come here to sing. I came here to level up. And the singing is not part of leveling up. I was going to become some kind of super person after this conference, and this isn't it. I feel threatened. I'm not getting what I need. And then another thing happens, and another thing. Things are always happening. Why do things keep happening? It's almost like the world itself actually isn't stable. It keeps changing. I don't like it. So as long as we are in this loop, we'll keep releasing these stress hormones. And over time, it becomes our default states. Right? So this is a graph of what happens to our immune system under chronic stress by the Hungarian-Canadian endocrinologist Hans Selye. Say that 3 times fast. And so we enter what's known as a resistance phase, where our body is constantly mobilizing, constantly preparing to protect ourselves from threats. A full-blown threat never fully emerges in a way where we feel like we can resolve it, because we get very good at finding other things we don't like. So everything becomes part of this like threat cloud. We're in it. And over time, cortisol is not designed really to just swim in. And it starts to make our arteries harden. And among other stress hormones, it starts to eat away at the base of our brains. Now I'm threatened by the fact that I'm threatened. And then eventually something breaks down. Eventually, days, months, years, lifetime, something breaks. And so, uh, one thing that's amazing is we know this, right? We know this. We've known this for a long time. And there are ways to get back into balance. In the past 20 years, the surfboard that I've ridden for my career, so I'm grateful for, serendipity, is that we know that mindfulness practices can help us break out of these loops. Right? And we have like top tier evidence, which I've already variegated in its impact in areas like depression, dealing with chronic pain, and like insomnia. You name it, you can probably take any sort of practice where someone feels stuck and help get them unstuck doing mindfulness practices. Like, well, okay, and that's great. You need to wait for high tier scientific evidence. Now that evidence exists. And so this brings up the mean. Science has now validated that mindfulness will help us get unstuck. Oh, great. So we're all going to start, everyone's going to start meditating and practicing, right? Right? And this isn't a problem just for mindfulness, right? We know that every major medical initiative, especially psychotherapeutic initiatives where the mechanism isn't as clear cut as put this substance into someone's bloodstream, has what's called a clinical voltage drop when you get past the place where the people who are passionate and customizing, adapting to change just so are sort of helping to promote the science, the clinical science, and pushing it into the community, we start to lose efficacy. With mindfulness, arguably, we lose a lot of efficacy between going on a retreat or a manualized program with a really experienced teacher and what most people would consider practice. And so what ends up happening is most people don't end up developing any sort of practice. There's a couple of factors that really predict that people will stick with a mindfulness practice. Right? There's research on this. If you actually have a human teacher that you talk to, maybe one day soon an AI teacher that you talk to, or you go into an intensive retreat or mindfulness course, there's a good chance you'll practice more afterwards. And if you just you try it once, you're like, wow, I'm liberated. I'm going to liberate all beings. Yeah, you'll probably keep practicing. A huge personal benefit. But there are a lot of other ways people get into mindfulness training. Doing something with an app, taking one little seminar, practicing for a couple hours one day probably isn't going to stick. And you heard yesterday, even if you do go on retreat with really good intentions, it's hard to find a way to integrate it into daily life. And so when you look at long-term follow-up data from people who do 8-week mindfulness interventions for students, almost everyone stops doing formal practice if you follow up a year later. There's hope there because a lot of people still take something with them and they'll try to do some kind of informal practice a year later. Right? So you get what looks like more of a normal distribution for informal practice, where Blue Arrow is, which means it's not for everyone, but some people found some stuff to carry with them even a year later after a unique course, which is amazing. But we're fooling ourselves if we think that most people are going to take a course like that and then have a devout, formal sitting and slow zombie walking practice. And it's not just because people are lazy or broken. They have valid concerns. We surveyed around 1,000 people on Reddit, 240 who had some experience in meditation. Around a quarter of them stopped meditating. We asked them why. It's like high demand. It's hard to feel like you're deepening your learning after that initial high intensity thing. And also, there's lots of other reasons that aren't highlighted in red here. For some people, it actually wasn't a good practice for them. Either culturally, socially, they got into conflict, or personally, it wasn't healthy for them to practice the way that they're taught to practice. So there are lots of reasons why a one size fits all, this is the course, this is the retreat, this is the right way to do things. The science, the data coming back from people who tried it is like, that doesn't work for everyone. For most people, it doesn't work at all after a year of getting stuck and keep doing the same thing. Hopefully, there's lots of evidence to suggest that doing like an hour a day or do Vipassana 2 hours a day, like first in the morning, another hour in the evening, something like that, it doesn't really matter that much. If you're doing some kind of practice, you get comparable pre-post benefits. You can see moving from the blue to the green, regardless of whether it be caught, movement, seated practice, short, long. If people are engaged in practice, often things are changing for them. And what's been amazing about this retreat is it's centered the idea that if we want to have applied mindfulness, it doesn't have to look the way you think it needs to look. We've already seen, and that can be upsetting, right? Has anyone had at least one practice or thing you were asked to do where you just eye rolled hard and then tried to make sure no one saw you eye roll? Like, that's not how we do it. Yeah. So you're getting exposed to lots of different ideas. And we heard yesterday from Pitt's sister, I'm going to say your name right wrong, but Chai? Chai like tea. Then I read online that I was supposed to try to put a TR in. Just chai. Okay, thank you. Anyway, we heard like, yeah, okay, so you go to a retreat 4 days later, you're a bad person because you can't practice anymore. So what if you just did 3 breaths? That would still be really different than not doing 3 breaths. In my own lab, we get undergrads to just check in once a day for like 2 or 3 minutes about whether they're stressed or not. They're less stressed because they don't even do 2 or 3 minutes a day. And I'm talking about moral practice, right? Sinking into 3 breaths at the start of your morning is a different morning than if you don't do those 3 breaths. Checking in with yourself once an hour, well, that's even higher resolution. Maybe some stuff happens, but it doesn't require, I have to sit still even though my back's killing me and the tendon is sharing off my knee because I don't want to look bad in front of all the other people who are obviously enjoying things and becoming enlightened. Retreat experiences doesn't mean you can just do anything, right? Doesn't mean you can just, like 5 gurus on Instagram and you'll receive the same benefits. Doesn't mean that anything has the same effects. And so this is part of what I think people rightfully might be worried about. And you're like, oh, we're a mindful society now. Yep, you'll download the app. Yep, 30 million Canadian subscribers mean we are a mindful society. So if we're going to do some kind of practice, even if we're willing to let go of the idea that it has to always look the same way, there should be a couple of principles involved, I think. And I think there's 2 kind of levels principles. So one is there are probably universal things that happen to us as human beings that we should understand that guide our decisions around what to practice. And as a scientist, I'm committed to this idea that there are things that are near universal that are worth knowing. If you don't know this stuff, you will not be able to discern whether a practice is going to be beneficial or not. As long as the person has guru aura, then if that's what you're reading in as like whether or not you should trust them and do things, you can and you will be deceived. Because it will be to someone else's self-interest to deceive you and to use your attention for their own benefit. That is the battlefields that first world developed nations who are not currently at war. That's the hidden battlefield that we're fighting right now, right? The battle for our attention. So what is the mechanism that your attention is being asked to engage at any moment, especially when someone else is suggesting how you use your attention? If you don't have some sort of principles, general principles that you would wish for everyone, right? Buddhist universals or Kantian imperatives that you could wish for everyone that you think are true for all human beings that you think are important. Someone else will supply that script for you. and they won't tell you what the principle they're engaging are in. That you might start feeling like that thing has value. There is no real meaning. No one says bless you anymore. It's just about taking what you can get in each moment. So I think there are general principles that are founded in just what it means to be a human being that we could learn and we could get better at articulating and arguing about putting on the surface as something where value in our lives comes from. And then because of my personality, I strongly believe that like no one should tell you how to use or engage those principles. I think it's an act of well-intentioned violence to tell someone else how they need to engage those principles. Good to suggest ways to start. Say it worked for me. You might want to try it to say this is the correct way to engage these mechanisms. Is ultimately never going to let you walk your own path. Maybe a bit heretical, but I don't care. That's my personality. Find someone who tells you there's one right way that we should all do. You know, like. So there are real things that are real truths about human beings, and the way that you engage in those processes of getting unstuck, of breaking free from cycles of negativity, the access points you have to engaging in those mechanisms, that's for you to find out. That's if you want to be the kind of person who doesn't just calcify over time, that's your responsibility to find that access point. Maybe collectively, it's our job to make sure we understand the principles and to test them, to argue about them, to show that they're replicable, and to say, are they really universal, or are there boundary conditions, and so on and so forth. And I'm talking very abstractly, but let's have a more sort of concrete example. Right? So let's say you say there's something, I have pain in my body. And so you have hip pain. I have hip pain, right? Did too many sports, I wore away cartilage and connective tissue, or holes in it in my hip. Yay. And so if someone was just like, well, what really works for me is scalp massage, and I've been very successful at scalp massage, everyone should do it, I'd say like, I don't know if that really has a mechanism that makes sense for me for dealing with my hip. And if someone's like, well, you should just do full body exercise all the time, that'll make you stronger. It's like, it's true, but that's not actually addressing the specific mechanism underneath my source of suffering, which is in this particular part of my body. But I should maybe explore that some of it is a mental component, emotional component, historical, cultural component, but part of it also probably has like a mechanical component in targeting mechanisms of action towards what's going on in that part of my body, even if it comes from many different perspectives, is probably going to be quite helpful. So one of the mechanisms that I've been really interested in sort of pursuit of my career, for instance, is what happens when people get stuck negative. By negative, I mean specifically like low meaning, feeling loss of pleasure, loss of meaning, presence of a lot of negative self-judgment. We call that depression. And so we've done a lot of research. A lot of my career has been trying to find out what really is the general principle for what's happening when people become depressed. And then what is the general mechanism that offers a solution? See, highlighted. So we'll try to put people into situations where they feel a little threatened, but not like in an anxious, like, oh no, I got to do something right away, but more like there's no purpose in life. I've lost something. Maybe I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I'm worthless. And we'll try to look at differences in how people respond to those negative situations between the people who feel sad, as we've made them feel sad on purpose, but sort of get over it, versus those who sort of are caught in patterns of depression, anxiety, chronic pain, all the different ways that this feeling of being stuck in a negative place manifests. We'll try to find differences in how people respond subjectively, and then try to understand what's happening in the brain to explain the underlying, potentially universal mechanisms that explain resilience compared to vulnerability. So one of my favorite things to do is put people in the scanner. Super fun. And then we show them movie clips. We try to make them sad And I'm going to do happy media today, but I do have on a USB key some of the sad film clips if you really want to see them. And we reliably make people sad, and we try to understand what happens when we make people sad in the scanner compared to watching like home and garden television or something relatively neutral. And the biggest thing that we found was that although there's a lot of thinking and judging and relating what you're seeing in the movies to your own experience, there's a second pattern that we still don't really acknowledge as much societally. How come society hasn't adopted my ideas? And it must be their fault. And it's this idea that the other thing that happens when we start thinking and trying to unpack and understand and control our sadness at the front of the brain is a lot of the sensory parts of the brain actually start to turn off. What's happening on the surface of the brain, on the surface of the body is represented in a hairband map. Your feet are here, all the way down to your lips here. And then if you go inside past your lips toward the middle of the brain, you start representing what's happening inside the body, moving from the somatosensory cortex into the insula. That part turns off too. And the more it turns off, the more depressed people are. And the amount that they use the front of their brain to think and judge and try to control and analyze and explain, actually the differences in how much people activate the part of their brain does not explain their depression. It's how much that happens to the exclusion of sensation. They lose track of what's happening in their bodies, perhaps to protect themselves from the feeling. Perhaps it's just something that happens when you think really, really hard, but it's how much the feeling in the body state drops out that is actually explaining. And this is in a community sample, people who'd sign up for like mindfulness-based stress reduction. It explains how depressed they are. Then a much larger study now, thanks in no small part to Zindel Siegel and some other mentors, where we look at people who have a history of depression, make them sat in the scanner, and then also try to see what their pattern is. And once again, they activate the front of the brain and other sort of habit-forming parts of the brain. They turn off all the blue there, kind of sensory regions that are more in the back of the brain that get turned off and exposed to emotional stressor. That's just the pattern. The more past episodes of depression they have, in other words, the more deep conditioning they have in being depressed, the more they turn off specifically those sensory areas. The more leftover symptoms they have, even though at the time we scan them, they're recovered from those recent depressive episodes, the more they turn off those areas. And then if you look at what of the parts of this constellation of yellow and blue predict who relapses over the next 2 years, same regions predict relapse. The hot off the presses, we're just submitting it. Liliana submitted it 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago. There. I got student. We looked at what happens if you show people statements that they can either agree with or disagree with who have a history of depression. And let's do a little experiment. So I've been talking a long time. I want you have something you tell yourself when you're proud, right? Do you, or does anyone ever feel proud? Okay, I want you to think of a sentence something you would tell yourself when you feel like you're doing well. Okay, do you have a sentence? You could just be like, I don't suck. But it could be better than I could be like, I'm a worthwhile person. Okay, cool. Hold that in mind. I want you to think of something you tell yourself when things aren't going well. It could just be like, oh, but it's probably something you say about yourself. Okay, you don't have to do this if you feel like not stable. Sorry, I should have told you before. Too late, you already did it. Okay, so you have a sentence of something you say to yourself when you're feeling good about yourself, or something you deny something bad, or you have something you say to yourself when things aren't going well, something mean that you say to yourself, right? Okay, we're going to try each one. Imitation, you don't have to do it. Okay, so let's just spend 20 seconds. I want you to say the nice thing you say to yourself when things are going well. I want you to try to notice what it feels like. You can stop after if this is really uncomfortable. Just be nice to yourself for 20 seconds. Okay, this is even more of a caveat. If you're not feeling great right now, you ought to do it. I want you to spend 20 seconds being to yourself and say the thing you say to yourself when things aren't going well. right? But I want you to notice what it feels like. Okay, I can't go 20 seconds without you guys. It's too mean. All right, you probably have a sense of it. So when you're being nice to yourself, does it feel a little bit like this? And when you're being mean to yourself, does it feel a little bit like this? So what do you think? What do you think's happening in your brain when it feels like this? It's like it's okay to feel things, right? It's safe. Like I'm not useless. Sometimes I don't suck. Maybe I need. Am I good? No. Before the no happens, and then when you say no, not safe. We can see this in the brain, right? We see the sensory parts of the brain turn on more when people say yes, nice things about themselves in the scanner, or when they say no, the bad things. It's not that it just means always saying yes. Sometimes it means you saying no. Someone says you're worthless. You say, no, I'm not. That's still an opening. And when you say yes to the bad things and no to the good things, the front of the brain, keeping things stable, setting up boundaries. You know that this is the pattern that's associated with depression. And in this task, both of these patterns, not letting yourself open up in sense and saying yes to the bad stuff and going really prefrontal, controlling, explaining, both of these things predict depression. If you put them together to fight it out to see what the best predictor is, it's how much people lose track of what's happening in their body. The story we tell ourselves about depression is about fixing the bad judgments. Judgments are fine. I mean, maybe they're not fine to you, but like they're going to happen anyway. You don't have control. You might not have some control over whether those judgments get to be the only thing you pay attention to. Is it anger and then explain anger and focus more on anger and unpack anger and then go to a 3-week seminar on how to control your anger? Whereas it's like anger, but also, I'm eating something yummy. Like my socks feel warm. I'm just itchy for something neutral. My skin feels dry. That's not really about me being a failure, is it? No. Okay. So essentially, we can get back to like children's books to understand what our problem is. Most of the time, what we're doing with our emotions, squishing the garbage down with our squasher downer. And it feels like we're protecting ourselves. It is not so good for us. I've been talking. Okay, I want to get into the solution, right? So this is what I think is maybe the universal mechanism, right? It's this kind of thing is described for a long time, right? If you understand this is a universal mechanism, you will see that lots of different personalized practice instructions engage this mechanism, right? Monks, your first job is to pay attention to the breath and notice if it is long or short. First job, the other jobs, then you practice. Sensation. Why is this the first job? Why don't you start thinking about, the meaning of the universe and how you're going to fix the world and all of that stuff? Because it's when you do it from here, when you're just in the front of your brain, not going to be able to think differently. All you can do is manipulate and rehearse what you already know. There's no room for change in a system that is designed to promote stability and identity alone. That system needs to be balanced by a system that introduces change. That system that introduces change is known as sensation. It is built into all of us. There's no living being that does not have the ability to sense. Sensation is where change gets in to us. Action, language, speech, thought, the conceptual thought is where we try to introduce stability and push it out into the world. It's not wrong. It's half of who we are. It's not all of who we are. So, sensation is the agent of change. I feel worthless. Maybe you do. You feel worthless all the time. Can't get tired. See a puppy. So when the breath is long, you notice the breath is long. When the breath is short, you notice the breath is short. You're starting to just add some weight to the other system, the other of the two systems that make up who you are as a human being. We know that training in mindfulness, I'm going to speed up a little now subtly to get through so we can actually chat a little. No. Just to say that mindfulness training is associated with people starting to feel like they can sense more, especially sensing more in their bodies. When people do that kind of training in the scanner and all the sensation stuff is turning off, when they feel sad, they stop turning it off as much. So the blue dots there are people who've done mindfulness training and can be sad without losing track of sensation. And so the mechanism that I'm suggesting to you is you can reclaim your balance by reclaiming sensation as part of your daily practice. What is the percentage of your day that you'd like to spend taking in information that could change you versus just trying to keep things the way they are? The percentage right now in the intentional percentage, where you do it on purpose, is 0. You're going to become imbalanced. You're only doing arm day. You have tiny little legs when you go to the beach. Okay. So we need to find practices that address the sensory shutdown. And this is where we came up with this term, sense foraging. So you're intentionally sending your attention into your senses, not to confirm something you already know, but with a willingness to be surprised. What is the concrete action where you let yourself be changed? You try to notice something you're not used to noticing from your senses. It could be more nuanced than that. You could say, I'm really missing connection in my life. I'm missing a sense of value in my life. I'm missing fun in my life. Right? You could pick something more specific you're being receptive to, but you don't know where it's going to come from. If you already knew, you'd be happy. So let's do a couple of practices because I talked about. Okay. Right now, I want you to hold an intention in your heart mind. And I'm going to give you some stimuli. And let's go visual first. Let's do 30 seconds of visual sense foraging. But first, I want you don't have to, but if you wanted to have a chance to work, you need to stop putting it off and I'll wait until the perfect exercise comes up and I'll participate in this 2-day conference. Okay. Just be vulnerable and open for at least one of the next 2 exercises if you want something to change. Okay. Let's do something visual first. What's it like? Look at this right now. What's happening? And then percent foraging is Mark Rocco, by the way. You should check back in. Did anything happen? Is it engaging at all for you? You're like, I hate visual arts. I feel threatened. Maybe that wasn't your access point. For some of you, did anything bubble in that 20 seconds I gave you? A little bit? Okay. Do it again. Let's try something else. Let's go auditory. Something you're missing in your life? See what happens. Rahul, did you stop sitting formally? It's okay. That's out of that. Stop. Practice closed. I dare you. Do it again. Anyone exhausted from all that formal meditation? Okay, this is the introvert's nightmare. I want you to turn towards your neighbor and just look at them. Just look at them. Okay, stop. Whoa. Too much energy. No, close it down. Close it down. Close it. Close it. Front brain only. Stop. These people. Sharing experiences and connecting. Like, so you had an intention to practice. You looked at your neighbor. Maybe something happens. Sorry. My story is about being an introvert. Okay. And then you can just notice, is there anything there for you? And if the answer is no, that's fine. Right? I'm not telling you how to engage the mechanism. That was just something you could try. You didn't have to try it. It's on you. All right, let's do one more. Set an intention to practice. If you want to go along with me one more time. I want you to look at this fun little circle. I want you to breathe along with the circle. If you hate breathing, just watch the circle. I want you to tell me if the circle is changing, how fast is pulsing. It's going to pulse. You ready? 3, 2, 1. Make rocket go now. Well, that was way more structured, wasn't it? That was structured. Anyone like structure? Oh, you like structure? You just have to watch the circle and tell me whether it's sped up or slowed down. Okay, how many people think it stayed the same? Stayed the same? How many people think it slowed down? People slow down? How many people think it's sped up? Okay, doesn't really matter. I mean, it not for what I'm talking about. So we're doing a lot of these circle things. We can actually measure individual differences in who can tell how fast things speed up or slow down. Some people are really good at noticing small changes. Life bothers them more. Some people are really bad at it. People are mad at them and they don't know why. Guess what? How good you are at detecting whether the circle speeds up or slows down is not related to your mental health. You know what is related to mental health? How much you feel confident and enjoy looking at circles speeding up and slowing down. You like all this well, I don't like looking at the picture. What am I supposed to do with the picture? I hate art galleries. So, we can have sensory tasks that have very specific goals. You can even find out whether you're right or wrong. That's important to you. It doesn't stop it from being sensory absorption. Check back in. How was that for you? And if you're like, you made me make a decision after I sensed, so don't do those kind of tests. The point is, if you understand the general mechanism, you can be open to what your access point is going to look like. No one starts a meditation tradition trying to do exactly what your master taught them. No one gets, well, that's not true. Most people who get remembered the most make a difference in other people's lives by following their own path. Yes, there has to be some mechanism they're tapping into that other people can relate to, but the way they do it, courageousness to do it on their own, maybe to find others who feel like it works for them too, and create some conversation and energy around that. That's what makes a difference. Okay? So, none of us know what's right for someone else. None of us know what's right for someone else. You may have some inklings about some general principles that are wholesome or helpful for others that you wish to communicate. Go for it. But you don't know exactly what it's going to look like for someone else to have access to it. So sense foraging is this idea of trying to engage in a sensory receptive state intentionally, and then seeing if you can find one that feels good for you. And then by the time school, you can think like, well, how can I support this process for myself, for the people around me? Here's an animated GIF I made. Move out of stuck in habit to adding in some sensation. And then boom, flourishing happens and we find that balance. So you can read more about our whole research process in this book, Better in Every Sense, that we wrote. I think they sell some outside among many other cool books. And I have left 1 minute for conversation. So thanks so much for listening. Appreciate it. Hand it out.